everyone. I see we have a lot of folks joining right now, so I'm going to pass it off to Carl Brundage to begin his session on Animate Your Data with Einstein Analytics.
Thanks, Zach. Everyone, I'm excited to be here to present this topic for you. It's something I've been working on for a while and really inspired by some of the capabilities of Tableau, and finally found a way to work them into Einstein Analytics. So our agenda for today, what we're going to talk about, we're going to take a look at animation in general. Where is it useful? Is this something we want to consider in order to help our data tell a story? Then we're going to jump into some data. We're going to take a look and explore some information of data sets that I've put together and build out a dashboard. And on our journey together, we're going to look at how a little bit of data prep can make our lives so much easier. So there's a lot of times where making things sit in the data set instead of calculating on the fly can make your life so much simpler. We're going to jump out of Einstein Analytics for a few minutes and take a look at a Lightning component and the SDK, so the Analytics SDK, and how that helps us finish off our solution. And if we do everything right, we're going to have some animation domination at the end and take a look at our dashboards in motion. So if we think about animation, is this something that can actually help us? Or is this more of a gimmick? Is this reserved for cat GIFs on Twitter where you see a cat jump out of a box? Well, when I think about animation, what it does for me is it draws attention to what matters. If you think about something moving, you tend to focus in on that. So you can see what's changed, and the other things, the things that haven't made a change over time or between one value and another, that kind of fades away into the background. So as a viewer of a dashboard, it makes it a lot easier for you to spot that trend and understand what's changed. So if we think about my past experience, where have I used animation? If I go back a few years, what I was faced with was we worked at a company that served the healthcare life sciences industries. And we actually surveyed all the doctors and all the healthcare organizations in the United States. So every 6 months, every year, we would phone verify where everybody worked. So we had this really powerful set of data. But if you've ever tried to sell data, sometimes it's not that interesting for people to look at unless they have a way to visualize it. Well, in pulling out this data, what we found was there is a radical shift underway in the healthcare industry. A lot of doctors that used to practice in private practices, so a doctor or a couple of doctors would go out, it was called setting up your own shingle, you would be under your own roof, run things on your own. Well, there was a shift underway. They were moving into corporate medicine. They were taking jobs either as part of a large healthcare institution. You can think of big names like the Cleveland Clinic, the UPMC in Pennsylvania, and also in these government organizations called accountable care organizations, which was how you would deliver medicine. So we were moving from individual practices to corporate medicine. With Tableau, what I was able to do, I was able to put together a visualization that looked at the percentage of doctors that were in private practice by state, by zip code, really any level. And it started in green. And when that percentage dropped, it turned to red. So over the course of a couple of years, if you just hit play on that dashboard, you would watch the country turn from green to red. And it was really easy for somebody to visualize the change that was going on in the healthcare industry. So I have a couple of references. We can look at creating data that moves with your Viz animations in Tableau. That was kind of the inspiration for what I'm sharing today. So if we look at some visualizations from Tableau, here's one that's focused on the home runs in baseball. So you don't have to be a sports fan to appreciate this, but you can see how, people start approaching where Babe Ruth was. Willie Mays is coming up. Is he going to get there? Okay, Hank Aaron's going up. So you can kind of focus on those top people and see how they're doing. Another visualization with animation, here's evictions in San Francisco over time. And what you can do is you can watch those numbers go up and down. You can see the spikes in different zip codes in the San Francisco area. So really helpful to know where activity is. So we can do it in Tableau, but how do we bring those capabilities to Einstein Analytics? Well, let's start and think about animation in general. If we want to think about our favorite Disney movie, there's a start and an end to it. And if we go way back, the way you did animation, you would work on cellophane, so a clear piece of, I'll call it paper, that you would write a character. So Mickey Mouse has his hand up in the air, and then you'd write another one with his hands a little bit over, and then his hands up. And then as you play those automatically, it looks like he's moving. So if we think about that, what we need to do is we need to take a slice of data on a filter condition and keep changing it. And the trick is we have to play that automatically. We need to make it go without somebody needing to be involved. So what does EA give us to do that? Well, we can know the start and the end. We have mins and maxes, so we can look at the range of data. We have our wonderful dashboards with a way to facet. So if you make one filter change, it'll affect everything else. Obviously, we can filter the data, but that automatic execution, it just isn't there. There's not a way to say, go ahead and run through all the conditions in a particular attribute or a particular measure and take the different values. So that's where my Lightning component, it comes to the rescue, it saves us. So we start with the Analytics SDK. And if you haven't worked with this, it's a way to discover your dashboards, your lenses, your data sets. Do that completely outside of Einstein Analytics. You can call in from Salesforce. You can call in externally and figure these things out. So what this will let us do is it'll let us see what are the fields in my data set? What are the values in it? But more importantly, we can send events to our dashboard. We can say, hey, dashboard, go ahead and apply this filter. So with the SDK, I can say, I want to apply a filter, wait a second, and apply the filter with the next value, and then wait and apply, wait and apply. So if I do that over and over and over again automatically, I have my animation effect. So with that Lightning component, it interacts with the SDK. It's parameterized for use with Lightning App Builder, and it will support various dashboards. So enough of me telling you what we're going to do. Let's actually take a look at how I did it. So I'm going to move into my EA dashboard. And what I'm going to start with is a data set. And if you followed some of the blog posts I've done, I took a lot of the public sources around COVID and I put it into Python script and rearranged the data and published it out on GitHub so you can upload it into Einstein Analytics. So I'm using that just as the set of data that I have. So if you look at things, here's all the states. And I have data for the past 3 or 4 months in here. So you're seeing really high numbers because it reflects all the different pieces of data. What we want to do is we want to look at it by a particular date range. So I can take my period, year, month, day, and we can see over time, all right, Alabama went from 5 to 6 to 12. Or if we want to look at it differently, all right, the oldest thing in my data set starts in January in Washington, and then I have data up through just a couple of days ago. So if we think about that, well, there's my starting point. I want to start on January 22nd. I want to end on September 13th. So 2 of our problems are solved. We know where to start and end the animation. Now, what about taking slices? Well, I could work with the date, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to switch over to the epoch. And a lot of you are probably familiar with working with date epochs, especially from a second perspective. So the second epoch tells you the number of seconds since January 1st, 1970, so when the first Unix system went online. That is a way to see what each date is. But the thing about that is that date includes time as well. And I really don't care about the time because now I'm dealing with pretty big numbers. What you may not be familiar with is there's another measure out there. It's the epoch days. So each day gets assigned its own value. So if we look, there's been 18,283 days since the 1st of January 1970 to the January 22nd of 2020. So if we think about this, we could just put in a little handy formula and say, well, let's take column A, let's minus 182282. And what we'll do is we'll call this my display order. So now what I have is I have that handy counter that goes from 1 all the way down to 236. So what I can do with that is I can take it and I could say, well, instead of showing me by the period year, let's look at something like the state. So I can see, okay, all the different values for a particular day, and I could then even go ahead and order on it. Now, it's great that I have this in my compare table, but it would be a lot easier for me if I had it in my data flow, because doing that lets me build it into the data set. So I'm going to jump over to my data manager, and I have a generate data flow, and I'm actually really putting just in a simple compute expression. So I'm creating a display order field. And I'm kind of cheating a little bit. I know that my first starting value is 18,282. If you wanted, you could actually take and you could compute this. So you could use a compute relative, you could take the minimum value, you could inject it in and then subtract it off. But for our demo purposes today, we're just going to hard code it. What that gives me in results is now a value in here that counts up. So just like before, it's in the data set, it's my display order. It goes all the way up to 236. So great, now it's really easy for me to see where my data falls. So let's take this and let's put it into a dashboard. So I've built a dashboard that has a map of the United States. It's looking at all the different countries. There's a bar chart over here. And you notice my numbers are really, really high because it's the whole range from January in through September. What I added for the bottom, just to help you see, is a little calendar component that has those particular values, right? So there's 1, there's 236. So if you think about it, what we want to do on this dashboard is, if I start in July, we just want to filter it this way, this way. And you notice I'm just changing day by day, and my data is changing and things are moving around. So let's jump over to see what it looks like inside of Salesforce, how we build that together with the component. So I have that same dashboard. I have embedded it into a Lightning app page, and I now have this Lightning component for you. And I've put some additional things just to help with the understanding. You could keep this very simple and have a start and stop button. Heck, you could even make it autoplay if you wanted. But what I'm doing is I'm showing you from this particular data set, what's the minimum value, what's the maximum value. So I'm pulling that out dynamically. These aren't values that I've put in. It actually inspects and says what the value is. Where I'm currently filtering, so we can watch it progress through, how long we want to wait, and then start and stop buttons. What I've also done behind the scenes is I've given my component some parameters so that you can hook it up to different things. The default delay that we want to use, the name of the dashboard that we're supposed to filter, the ID of the data set that we need to work with, as well as the field. So you can point this at different data sets. It's not hard coded to use this one particular dashboard. It can filter on really any numeric field in any data set or dashboard that you want to go through and animate. So let's take a look at the code side of things. So what I have for you is I have a Lightning component. It has 3 pieces to it. It has this first CMP file, which is the HTML that we'll look at. It has a controller written in JavaScript, which is really how we're going to initialize, and then a helper function that has some common functions that I'm calling in multiple places. If we look at the Lightning component, this is the key piece that gets us SDK access. So in one line, Wave SDK, I can now interact with that dashboard from my component. I'm also going to register an event because the event will tell me, well, this is how you go and send the updates into the dashboard. You can do the filtering on it. The attributes in this section, well, you saw those fields on the screen as well as those design time parameters. These just hold all that information. So we take the dataset ID and we get the developer, or excuse me, we take the developer name and then we get the dataset ID and the name from it. We look at the field name, we look at the min and max value. Down here, this is nothing more than the display. It shows you the particular components as well as the buttons with clicks to help automate and destroy our animation. So what happens? When this first loads, this init function is called. So if we jump over to the controller side, I have my init function. And if we think about it, when that component first loads, what do we need to do? Well, we need to get the dataset ID that you told me to use. We need to build a call to the SDK to say, well, given the dataset ID, what can you tell me about it? So in this context, I call that function and say, tell me everything about this dataset, because I need to get it back a couple pieces of information. I need to get the name of it, because there's some places when I query that I need the data set ID, and there's some places when I query that I need the data set name. So I could ask the user to put them in, but why not use the SDK to do that heavy lifting for you? The other thing I need is I need the current version. You're constantly updating data sets, so the version ID changes each time you run a data flow, and I always want to make sure I'm using the latest version of it. So from there, I want to execute a query. I want to say for the data set that you told me to use, the current version of it, well, tell me the min value of the field that you're using and the max value of the field that you're using. So if you remember on the component, you told me to use display order. So what's the min and the max values? When I get those back, I put them out on the screen. So that's setting up that first part of the component that says, well, we need to go from 1 to 236. What else happens? Well, when you click the start button, we handle the automation. So the automation says, how long should I delay? You told me to wait 1 second. I need to say, well, it's actually milliseconds, so I need to convert it to the number of milliseconds. That's why I multiply by 1,000. I'm going to delay 1 second, which is 1,000 milliseconds. And what I'll do is I'll say, after that time elapses, run this function. I want you to run increment and filter. And that's over in my helper. So guess what that does? Well, it does just like it says. It says, get the current version that you're filtering on. If we have not gone past our max, add a value to it and filter. If we have gone through our max, we want to stop. There's no point in continuing filtering. All your data would disappear from your dashboard. So the filtering, what does that look like? Well, that's another SDK function. So I told you before we needed a data set name. This is setting up a filter just like you would when you were filtering in adding an embedded dashboard, right? Remember before we had the nice little builder, you had to hand code all that JSON in? Same idea here. I'm going to say this data set, here's the name, the field that you told me to use. I'm going to set an operator of equals to the value that it currently is. So we're just counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're filtering it every time. We send that update in, it filters our dashboard with the fire event, and we filter. So let's go and see if everything works. We'll take a look at it in action. So I'm going to go back to my animation. I'm going to click start. And what you're going to see is it's starting to build out over time. So how did COVID progress in the United States? It started in Washington, and then it started picking up in other areas of the country. So what we can do is we can stop this and we can jump ahead. Let's jump ahead into the 178 if we want. So we can further things along. Because what's interesting is if I start looking at this pie chart, the bar chart, you can see where certain states start climbing the ranks. It's easy to see, okay, New York, it's starting to drop down because other states are taking over of it. So what we can do is we can control this. We can do things like, maybe we want to filter faster. So we could change our delay and we could go through very quickly. So in this case, you can control how you want this to behave. You can make it go fast, you can make it go slow, you can filter every slice of data. If you have a large data set, you could set it so that it skips. So we could skip a couple pieces and we could filter every 10th slice if you wanted. So there's a lot of ways that you can make it behave. Now, the reason that you kind of saw the refresh is it is rerunning your dashboard. So it's applying that filter and refreshing the data. So you do have to wait for it to execute. So we went through our demo. What could I do to improve this? Well, this is, to me, a version 1 of the solution. So there's a lot of things that I did. I hard-coded it to equals, right? So I'm always doing the value equals what you specified. If you wanted to do a line like the baseball one where you show all the past data, we would need to parameterize the operator so that you could show less than equals and you could show growth over time. I'm always just incrementing by 1. If you wanted to have a different step, you could put that in so that you could step by 2 or 5 and jump through. In addition, maybe you want to do the data in reverse. Maybe you have a scenario where you want to start with the max and be able to decrement and go back in time or back in attributes. You could change it to do that. I'm only supporting measures right now because it was pretty easy to create that display order. You may find a case where you want to step through different attributes or go through dates. You could enhance it that way. In my example, it is a classic Aura component because a lot of the SDK documentation is there. Maybe you wanted to build a web component. So there's a lot of ways to take this and make it your own, which I have out there. I have a GitHub repository, EA Animate. I will put this in the Slack channel for you, but all of the code that I used is out here. So I have the example app. I have some of the assets I used in Einstein Analytics, as well as the Aura component. So feel free to take that, take a look at what I was doing, make it your own, make it use for your use cases. If you're interested in learning more about the SDK, there's links here as well so that you can go out and see what can you do with it, as well as how do you go ahead and fire events. So that information is out there. At this point, I think it's a good time to turn to any questions that we have. So Zach, where would be a good place to start? I know there's some things came in the chat that I have not been looking at yet.
Let me see. First question, can you pass in pages as well as filters to create a carousel?
Oh, thanks, Pete. I appreciate that. I have no clue off the top of my head. I've not looked at whether the SDK passes or supports the ability to pass in pages, but that would definitely be interesting where you could make it change as through your animation. So the way that we use the page trick to basically show something moving from one place to another, yeah, it would be cool to do that. So I think that's a nice one to check out.
Cool. The next question is, does it refresh the dashboard every time? Can you expect a load time on larger data sets?
So yes, we're refreshing the dashboard because we're applying that filter. So we're changing the filter conditions, just like if you were to pick a filter from a dropdown. So if you had a list at the top and we had all of our display options and you picked one versus the other, the way your dashboard refreshes. So you could expect a similar type of load experience as to when you were running your dashboard. So if it's something that somebody picks something from a filter and it takes 20 seconds, then we would need to take that into account from an animation perspective and make sure our delays are slower.
Great. Is there a way to disable the loading animation on the dashboard?
Yes, so that's probably a good question for Salesforce to answer. I'm not aware of a way to disable that little EA spinny that comes up in between it. It would be great to be able to remove it so that you didn't have the white flash. If you go to a shorter delay, it's not as obvious. So when I was testing it out and did some things where, let me go back to it. If we change this to 200 and we change this to 3 seconds, it doesn't flash quite as much. It's less obvious. So it's kind of a shorter delay. You get to focus more, and then the flash is briefer. So right now you kind of live with it unless Salesforce has a way the product management team knows of to do that.
And another question just came in. This was a relevant example. Have you used this for any customers and which use cases?
A lot of times the timeline aspect, I've used it a lot from a date perspective in order to show that something has grown from this value to another, or this is how it progressed over time. So if you think of like US unemployment claims, right? They bounced around and then in March, they just kind of skyrocketed. So being able to show that progression where you can build something, whether it's sales, whether it's churn, whether it's renewals, those are the type of use cases that I've come in to be able to show that change over time. I'm sure there's non-time based aspects, but that's generally where I've done it.
Great. And another question came in. Carl, are you volunteering Skip's ecosystem developer evangelist for EA in the Lightning software development kit now?
Thanks, Jeff. No, Skip will probably look at it and be like, "Oh gosh, you did that. You should never do that." So, I'm waiting for him to take a look at my code and rip it apart. But it was kind of a unique case where I could use the SDK to solve something that I've been wanting to do for a while, which was a great that it existed out there.
And it looks like someone is typing in the Slack room right now.
Okay,
So
let me switch over there.
might be a big one. We'll see. But if you have any other questions, we still have time for another question or two. Nope, that's more of a comment.
Oh yeah, the large data set. I would try it out. I mean, try. You know how your dashboards are. You know how your data sets are. So it was. I can't. I don't have a silver bullet that says, oh yeah, it's suddenly faster to filter through the SDK than inside of Analytics Studio. I mean, that kind of constraint still works there. So I would look at some of the optimizations for a data set first. But what I'll do, I will make sure I take a copy of the presentation and the links and put those into the Slack channel. I'm available at Carl Brundage on Twitter. If there's follow-up questions, definitely grab the GitHub if you want to look at it. If you want to improve upon it, by all means, it's out there for the community now.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl. And just a reminder, when you leave the Zoom, there will be a window that'll pop up in your web browser that'll have the survey. If you could just take the survey, it'll just take a few moments of your time. That'll really help the organizers improve the experience for next time around. And it looks like we're going to end just 2 minutes early, but that means we're right on time.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure.